The qualities of an IP soul depend on where that IP soul comes from.
Mhm.
Depend on where is their home base and what's the nature of the culture at their home base. But an IP soul is usually fascinated with the universe, fascinated with the night sky. Often an IP soul will say to me, you know, when I was a kid from about age 4 to about age 10, I just stood by the window and looked out at the night sky sometimes for an hour or two.
Mhm.
Um, so an IP soul is very wise spiritually, usually has very significant gifts of some sort, but as I said, often struggles with numerous health issues and sensitivities because they're simply not used to dealing with what we, the foods and additives and toxins that exist on our planet Earth.
Love it. And your IP Souls client, do they ever tell you where they're from? Like, do they mention names, planets, star systems, races?
Yes, I'm glad you're asking me that. So often, if I'm guiding a client, now there are many times, Will, when a client comes for a regression, they don't even know they're an interplanetary soul. Or there are sometimes they suspect it, and then others do know. But sometimes when they come for the longer regression, the client learns their IP and they've never even considered that. And one of the most common experiences that happens in the regression for an IP soul is when I guide the regression, the client usually goes directly to their home location
Hmm.
and they get to spend time where they come from. So it would be sort of like it would be like the American person who has been raised in the Midwest, maybe raised in Iowa and never left Iowa, and then suddenly they have to go live in the middle of Manhattan or they have to go live in the middle of Beijing, and it's like what's this all about? Why are these people behaving or eating or whatever? So when I guide an IP soul, almost always in the regression, they spend time during the regression at their home location. Um, Now, people ask me, well, what's common, Linda? Is it Pleiades? Is it Arcturus? Is it Orion's
I
belt?
was gonna ask you.
Yeah, and what I have to say is yes, on occasion it is those familiar or those locations where we know the name, but often my clients come from places where there isn't a name that's even familiar to us because there are so many possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it possible that their home is more than one? Like maybe in one regression they might regress to the Pleiades, and then the next one it's the Arcturus.
Yes, that again is an awesome. I always think I said this to you before we started. I knew we'd be guided to talk about what we need to talk about. So IP souls vary. Some IP souls come from a location, and that's where their higher self resides, period. And when that, we'll just use the Pleiades as an example. If I'm working with a Pleiadian client, and when the client finishes current life, that slice of their soul that's in their body, it returns back to the Pleiades. But I also have IP clients who actually, I was learning this just the other day from a new client. One example would be this client started out somewhere, we might say, very far away from Earth and very, very different from Earth. And when her soul began to prepare to possibly come to Earth, then her guides led her to spend time in more than one IP location that gradually those locations were somewhat more similar to Earth to help prepare her.
Hmm.
Um, there are also IP souls of a couple of people that I've worked with a fair amount. Um, they've been labeled as traveler souls, which means they're IP souls, but labeled as traveler souls because they don't spend time on just one location, period, and they never have. So it really varies a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there is a reason why you mention the Pleiadians because um, I consider myself a Pleiadian starseed. Can we use the IP souls and starseed interchangeably?
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah. And in fact, like my most popular video on YouTube is about the Pleiadians. And like I have a guided meditation as well that is like one of my most popular. And so I feel like there is a portion of the listeners that are interested in the Pleiadians and star seeds. But also when I did a star seed origin chart, and in the chart it confirmed that like most of my coordinates were from the Pleiadians, but there were also other minor coordinates from Orion and
Mm.
Lyra. So I guess from my understanding, we can have different lives in different places, but like you said, maybe the my higher self resides in the Pleiades. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, it could be, Will, that your higher self is just a possibility. I never know until we do regression. And yet, intuitively, you may know the answers, even without regression. It could be that your higher self resides in the Pleiades. Um, but there are two possibilities. One would be you've had past lives, you've had interplanetary past lives here and here and here and here that are all IP locations. That's a possibility. Or it could be that, yeah, there's my guides are talking to me in my head. There's another option, which I'll add in a minute, but that you basically spend most of your time um, in the Pleiades, and yet you also have spent some time as a soul, not just past lives, but your soul has traveled to one other place and spent time there, to two other places and spent time there. So it really varies a lot. The piece that my guides were putting in my mind to say just now, um, let me say two things. One is I'm always learning more. Give me 3 more months of working with clients, and 3 months from now, because of my clients, I'm going to know more about IP souls or angelic souls because I learned from my clients. Um, but also, what my guides were putting in my mind was about spacecraft. And I have lots of clients. Now, the psychologist Linda 30 plus years ago wouldn't be saying these kind of things. It would be like, that's the wonkiest thing I've ever heard. Well, it's obviously not wonky to me anymore. So I have clients who, during the regression, experience their soul on a spacecraft. And what I'm about to say, I think is true, trying to ground this, that some IP souls don't necessarily come from a location. They come from a spacecraft
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily belong to a location. I think that's a possibility.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. And